You never forget the smell of your life burning to the ground. It lingers in your hair, your skin, your soul. That stench still clung to me when she strutted into my courtroom as if she owned the building. There I was, Judge Miriam Blackwood, cloaked in black robes, gavel poised, glaring at the woman who had just committed arson against a sitting judge. The audacity of it made my jaw tighten. But Bryn Ashworth Sterling had no idea what storm she had stepped into. When you set fire to a judge's house, you'd better pray she never gets the chance to return the blow through the law. And darling, I was ready to dish out a 5-course banquet of justice, garnished with federal prison time. This self-crowned HOA queen thought torching my home would silence me. Instead, it fueled a blaze inside me destined to swallow her entire corrupt little empire. Every bogus fine, every sham claim, every bullying tactic, I had all of it recorded. What would you do if your destroyer walked into your grasp on a silver legal platter? Where are you watching from? Because this retaliation was about to get savage. Half a year before my home turned into a crime scene, I was Judge Miriam Blackwood, respected, feared by criminals, and utterly broken. I had just laid Harold to rest after watching cancer dismantle him piece by piece. 28 years of marriage gone. Our 1940s craftsman in Pinewood Estates felt like nothing more than a tomb. Pinewood had once been the haven of working-class families and retired teachers who tended flower beds with care. Then the wealth rolled in. Modest ranch houses were bulldozed for sprawling McMansions with triple garages and wine cellars. The old guard, folks like Walt Henderson, who'd been here since '65, saw property taxes rocket sky high while newcomers complained about keeping neighborhood standards. Leading this gentrification crusade was none other than Bryn Ashworth Sterling. Imagine every spoiled suburban nightmare you've ever crossed paths with, then top it off with luxury gymwear and a god complex. 45 years old, behind the wheel of a gleaming silver Tesla earning more than most people see in a year. She always had some $20 superfood smoothie in hand while preaching about how everyone else was living incorrectly. 2 years back, she had arrived with her contractor husband, announcing instantly that she would transform Pinewood to its true potential. In other words, clear out the undesirables. I first crossed paths with Bryn while building Harold's memorial fence. He and I had planned this 6-foot privacy wall together in his final days, a small refuge where we could share coffee and watch sunrises unseen. The fragrance of his beloved roses lingered in the cool air as I worked, 15 years of his careful gardening still blooming despite his absence. The sharp crunch of luxury boots on fallen leaves announced her approach. You must be the widow. No sympathy, no greeting, just a flat evaluation. Judge Blackwood, I corrected, brushing soil from my palms with steady restraint. Ah, the judge, she replied, as if the title itself were contagious. I'm Bryn, HOA president. We've got a problem. She produced a pink tape measure, her chosen weapon, snapping it open with a metallic crack that sliced the calm morning. She measured my fence with exaggerated care, lips pursed in artificial disapproval. 6 feet 2 inches. Our rules clearly state 6 feet maximum. That's a $500 fine, plus removal costs. I rose slowly, joints stiff from grief and sleepless nights. Show me that rule. Her polished nails rifled through a leather portfolio, clicking against paper like tiny gavels. After 5 minutes, nothing, because the rule didn't exist. My fence was exactly 6 feet, verified by a licensed surveyor I had hired precisely to prevent this kind of nonsense. She finally exhaled, her face flushed beneath the makeup mask. Spray tan glowing, she sneered, "We'll see about that, Judge." Her venom made it clear this had nothing to do with neighborhood codes. That night, over reheated leftovers and Harold's favorite bourbon, I pulled up case records. Jackpot. 3 years earlier, Sterling Premium Builders had stood in my courtroom attempting to swindle an 80-year-old veteran out of $30,000 for fake emergency roof repairs. The roof had been perfectly sound. I'd ruled against them decisively and referred the case for contractor fraud. This fence fight wasn't about regulations, it was payback. But Bryn had made a fatal miscalculation. She was coming after a woman who had spent 2 decades sentencing killers, predators, and swindlers without blinking. A woman who had sat beside her dying husband, planning his memorial even as she held his hand through the final moments. Someone with nothing left to lose and complete mastery of how the legal system could be wielded by someone who knew exactly where it cracked. The rough grain of Harold's fence posts beneath my hand reminded me why I'd built this wall, not to property inspector, and they spent 2 hours fabricating evidence for non-existent. Violation number 1, unapproved decorative garden item. The supposed offense? Harold's memorial stone, a modest granite marker etched with, "In memory of love that grows eternal." Evidently, that was against her rules. Her grief markers supposedly breached Pinewood's uniform landscape aesthetic. Next, violation 2, wrong mailbox color. My black mailbox had been the neighborhood standard since Reagan's era. Now it allegedly caused visual disharmony. The one that made my jaw clench was violation 3, excessive bird feeding creating a nuisance. My single modest feeder drew cardinals, Harold's favorite, and watching them had become my morning liturgy, coffee steam rising into the mountain air while I half expected him to appear behind me. Each notice dangled fines ranging from $200 to $500 and warned of liens and legal action. The heavy cardstock they used probably cost more than many of the fines. That's where 2 decades on the bench paid dividends. Back in law school, after a landlord tried the same thin intimidation, I'd studiously learned Colorado's HOA law. Bryn's letters contained more legal Swiss cheese than a mobster's excuse. Legitimate HOA penalties must be reasonable, tied to actual infractions, and supported by adopted bylaws. And proper hearing procedures are mandatory. Her notices cited rules that didn't exist and skipped the required procedures. Time for judicial payback. I spent 3 nights in Harold's basement office, surrounded by his casebooks and the musty scent of old volumes, assembling a response. Filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Real Estate Commission outlining Bryn's procedural failures. Photographed every angle of my property and built spreadsheets tracking her unlawful fine patterns. My training in evidence preservation was about to be repurposed. But Bryn hadn't exhausted her amateur theatrics. One Thursday morning, while I was downtown sentencing drunk drivers, my new security cameras recorded what can only be called criminally stupid behavior. Bryn arrived with an entourage, an interior designer dressed entirely in white like a fashion victim, and a personal trainer who seemed to have taken on the role of property inspector. And they spent 2 hours fabricating evidence for non-existent violations. The designer jabbed a finger at Harold's prize roses as if 15 years of careful tending had personally offended her chic sensibilities. The trainer, who seemed better versed in protein shakes than property codes, scribbled notes on a clipboard that looked official enough for a movie. I watched the footage that night, fury building. They were inventing evidence to justify phony fines. In court, that's textbook conspiracy to commit fraud. Then Walt Henderson showed up on my porch, pipe smoke curling into the cool evening, his voice low with worry. "Judge, this Bryn woman's been picking people off one by one. Remember the Rodriguez family? She bullied them into removing their Virgin of Guadalupe statue, called it non-conforming religious imagery. Drove up $800 in fines until they sold and left." My judicial instincts sharpened. What else? The single mom down the street? Fined because her kids drew chalk rainbows and hopscotch on their driveway, defacing the common area aesthetic, she was told. The pattern snapped into focus like pieces of a puzzle. Bryn wasn't merely after me. She was running a systematic harassment program aimed at anyone who didn't fit her suburban purity playbook. Hispanic families, single mothers, seniors on fixed incomes, and now a widowed judge who'd once ruled against her husband's contractor. This was discrimination masquerading as HOA governance, propped up by forged paperwork and unlawful fines. I'd wandered into the center of a broader criminal scheme that made my fence spat look like jaywalking. The scratch of my pen as I recorded each revelation filled Harold's quiet office. He used to say good legal strategy was like surgery, precise, methodical, and devastating when done right. It was time to perform major surgery on Bryn Ashworth Sterling's little kingdom of petty tyranny. She'd made the fatal error of tangling with someone who knew exactly how to dismantle her racket, piece by piece, using the very legal machinery she'd been corrupting. Harold always joked judges were referees with law degrees and attitudes to match. Time to blow the whistle. HOA Karen, meet the reality of what happens when you pick a fight with someone who literally writes the rules of engagement. Bryn's next move leapt from harassment into outright felony. When her fabricated violations didn't stick, she apparently decided a little breaking and entering might send a stronger message. She chose her moment well, while I was downtown handing an abuser 18 months in county. My security cameras captured every incriminating second of her so-called emergency inspection. Property inspector, and they spent 2 hours fabricating evidence for non-existent. Violation number 1, unapproved decorative garden item. The supposed offense? Harold's memorial stone, a modest granite marker etched with, "In memory of love that grows eternal." Evidently, that was against her rules. Her grief markers supposedly breached Pinewood's uniform landscape aesthetic. Next, violation 2, wrong mailbox color. My black mailbox had been the neighborhood standard since Reagan's era. Now it allegedly caused visual disharmony. The one that made my jaw clench was violation 3, excessive bird feeding creating a nuisance. My single modest feeder drew cardinals, Harold's favorite, and watching them had become my morning liturgy, coffee steam rising into the mountain air while I half expected him to appear behind me. Each notice dangled fines ranging from $200 to $500 and warned of liens and legal action. The heavy cardstock they used probably cost more than many of the fines. That's where 2 decades on the bench paid dividends. Back in law school, after a landlord tried the same thin intimidation, I'd studiously learned Colorado's HOA law. Bryn's letters contained more legal Swiss cheese than a mobster's excuse. Legitimate HOA penalties must be reasonable, tied to actual infractions, and supported by adopted bylaws. And proper hearing procedures are mandatory. Her notices cited rules that didn't exist and skipped the required procedures. Time for judicial payback. I spent 3 nights in Harold's basement office, surrounded by his casebooks and the musty scent of old volumes, assembling a response. Filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Real Estate Commission outlining Bryn's procedural failures. Photographed every angle of my property and built spreadsheets tracking her unlawful fine patterns. My training in evidence preservation was about to be repurposed. But Bryn hadn't exhausted her amateur theatrics. One Thursday morning, while I was downtown sentencing drunk drivers, my new security cameras recorded what can only be called criminally stupid behavior. Bryn arrived with an entourage, an interior designer dressed entirely in white like a fashion victim, and a personal trainer who seemed to have taken on the role of property inspector. And they spent 2 hours fabricating evidence for non-existent violations. The designer jabbed a finger at Harold's prize roses as if 15 years of careful tending had personally offended her chic sensibilities. The trainer, who seemed better versed in protein shakes than property codes, scribbled notes on a clipboard that looked official enough for a movie. I watched the footage that night, fury building. They were inventing evidence to justify phony fines. In court, that's textbook conspiracy to commit fraud. Then Walt Henderson showed up on my porch, pipe smoke curling into the cool evening, his voice low with worry.
"Judge, this Bryn woman's been picking people off one by one. Remember the Rodriguez family? She bullied them into removing their Virgin of Guadalupe statue, called it non-conforming religious imagery, drove up $800 in fines until they sold and left. My judicial instincts sharpened. What else? The single mom down the street? Fined because her kids drew chalk rainbows and hopscotch on their driveway, defacing the common area aesthetic, she was told. The pattern snapped into focus like pieces of a puzzle. Bryn wasn't merely after me. She was running a systematic harassment program aimed at anyone who didn't fit her suburban purity playbook. Hispanic families, single mothers, seniors on fixed incomes, and now a widowed judge who'd once ruled against her husband's contractor. This was discrimination masquerading as HOA governance, propped up by forged paperwork and unlawful fines. I'd wandered into the center of a broader criminal scheme that made my fence spat look like jaywalking. The scratch of my pen as I recorded each revelation filled Harold's quiet office. He used to say good legal strategy was like surgery, precise, methodical, and devastating when done right. It was time to perform major surgery on Bryn Ashworth Sterling's little kingdom of petty tyranny. She'd made the fatal error of tangling with someone who knew exactly how to dismantle her racket, piece by piece, using the very legal machinery she'd been corrupting. Harold always joked judges were referees with law degrees and attitudes to match. Time to blow the whistle. HOA Karen, meet the reality of what happens when you pick a fight with someone who literally writes the rules of engagement. Bryn's next move leapt from harassment into outright felony. When her fabricated violations didn't stick, she apparently decided a little breaking and entering might send a stronger message. She chose her moment well, while I was downtown handing an abuser 18 months in county. My security cameras captured every incriminating second of her so-called emergency inspection.
An authority that existed only in her self-inflated fantasy. There she was, bold as brass in designer yoga pants, parading through my backyard as if she'd closed on the deed. Pink tape measure swinging like a weapon, she snapped photos from angles that would make a tabloid photographer blush. Her gall hit its peak when she cupped her hands to the glass of my kitchen window, peering in at Harold's coffee mug, still on the counter, untouched, because I couldn't bring myself to wash it. And then came the unforgivable part. She yanked my back gate wide open. Not a slip, not a mistake, deliberate. The footage showed her tugging it hard, double-checking the latch to be sure it stayed loose, then striding off with a smug grin. I came home that evening, worn thin from a day of domestic violence testimony, to find my sanctuary violated and my worst fear realized. Gavel was gone. My 14-year-old Tabby wasn't just a cat, he was Harold's final gift to me. We'd found him 3 years earlier, shivering in a courthouse parking lot during a storm. He'd been the one to curl in Harold's lap during chemo, purring comfort into the pain. He was my last living tie to 28 years of marriage. The panic hit like a fist to the chest. I spent 3 days searching, my voice raw from calling his name through every alley and storm drain within 6 blocks. Walt Henderson organized search teams, neighbors fanning out with flashlights. Even the Rodriguez family, who'd fled town after Bryn's harassment, returned to help. Then came the call that froze my blood. "Judge Blackwood, this is Dr. Martinez at Mountain View Animal Emergency. Someone brought in a cat matching your description. He's in bad shape." I found Gavel barely clinging to life in an oxygen tent, ribs broken, dehydrated, his body trembling from trauma. $800 in emergency surgery later, the vet gave me news that made my hands shake with fury. These injuries match being pursued by machinery. High-powered blowers, maybe lawn equipment. The stress alone nearly killed him. The footage confirmed it. 1 hour after Bryn's unlawful trespass, her landscaping crew stormed in with industrial blowers, driving my frightened cat through the open gate she'd deliberately left ajar. They hounded him for 2 blocks until he collapsed in a storm drain, broken and dying.
This was no longer harassment. This was attempted murder of my family. But Bryn had crossed the one line she should never have crossed. She had committed multiple felonies against a sitting federal judge who knew exactly how to turn the legal system into a weapon. I replaced every lock, posted no trespassing signs, and filed criminal complaints for unlawful entry and animal cruelty. Then I called Channel 7's Sarah Morgan, a relentless journalist known for shredding suburban corruption. Judge vs. HOA, When Watchdogs Attack, aired 3 nights later. Sarah's expose laid bare Bryn's campaign against minorities and seniors, complete with the damning footage of her illegal trespass and her crew's assault on Gavel. The community response was explosive. Donations poured in, not only to cover vet bills, but to bankroll the legal fight to dismantle the toxic HOA. Justice for Gavel trended across social media. 3 major law firms offered pro bono representation. The Colorado Attorney General's office reached out about potential civil rights violations. And most importantly, other victims began stepping forward. Elderly Mrs. Morgan, forced to dismantle her late husband's memorial garden. The Johnsons, fined into bankruptcy for building a wheelchair ramp for their disabled son. A clear pattern emerged, Bryn targeting anyone who didn't fit her glossy suburban fantasy. And then, buried deep in Colorado's property statutes, I found it, a powerful piece of law that could change everything. Legal ammunition. Unlawful entry with the intent to intimidate carries the same penalties as burglary. Add animal cruelty charges, plus conspiracy where multiple actors are involved, and Bryn's landscaping crew hadn't merely committed a misdemeanor, they'd manufactured a federal RICO predicate. That night, Gavel finally curled against my chest for the first time since the assault, purring weakly while the new security system hummed and my keyboard clicked as I drafted criminal complaints designed to end Bryn's terror campaign for good. Harold always said judges were referees with permanent authority and very long memories. It was time to remind this suburban terror what happens when you assault a federal judge's family. She'd escalated from petty HOA infractions to felony assault. My response would be unforgiving. Bryn's panic went thermonuclear the moment her trespass turned into federal exposure. Predictably, she tried to take me down first. On Tuesday morning, a certified envelope arrived on my desk. Official Colorado Judicial Discipline Commission letterhead that made my morning coffee taste like dust.
Her complaint read like bad fiction. Judge Blackwood abuses judicial power to intimidate homeowners, weaponizes the bench for personal vendettas that endanger the community. The supporting evidence was a parody, doctored photos painting my memorial garden as an eyesore, fabricated witness statements from her designer and trainer alleging threats, and timestamps that would make a forensic tech choke on laughter. Then Bryn pulled her final cowardly trick. She leaked the story to partisan political blogs that had opposed my environmental rulings. Within hours, I was trending under headlines along the lines of "Liberal Judge Terrorizes Patriot HOA." The comments sections filled with keyboard warriors calling for impeachment, disbarment, and whatever creative punishments enraged strangers could invent. For 72 brutal hours, 2 decades of service were shredded by people who couldn't spell jurisprudence but fancied themselves constitutional scholars. Salvation arrived in an unassuming package, a silver-haired woman with a plate of homemade cookies. Patricia Pat Donnelly looked every inch the retired librarian in sensible shoes and a cardigan, hands slightly trembling with age. What she did not look like was a 25-year FBI veteran in financial crimes, someone who'd been quietly surveilling Bryn for weeks and who now had everything we needed. "Judge, you need to see this," she said, sliding into Harold's chair with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. Pat spread photos across my kitchen table like a dealer laying down a winning hand. Meet Bethany Sterling of Phoenix, Arizona. 3 insurance claims in 2 years, a suspicious flood, a conveniently timed electrical fire, and a miraculous vandalism.
and $400,000 that vanished just before a grand jury could interview anyone. My judicial instincts snapped into focus. Patterns show up like DNA. This was a repeat offender. A textbook scheme. Pick vulnerable neighborhoods, manufacture incidents to justify claims, and disappear before investigators close in. Pat's FBI instincts were surgical even in retirement. Here's the knockout blow. She'd applied for her current homeowner's policy under a false name. That's federal mail fraud. The paperwork Pat brought made any prosecutor's mouth water. Bryn's current policy listed her $800,000 home at $2.8 million, and her application was riddled with lies about prior claims, identity changes, and financial history that practically begged federal charges. "She's not targeting you because of old grudges," Pat said, methodically organizing evidence. "You're the diversion. Keep everyone arguing about HOA bylaws while she siphons emergency funds and sets up the next accidental fire." The revelation landed like a gavel. This wasn't mere personal vendetta, it was criminal misdirection. While I fought about fence heights, Bryn had been looting HOA emergency reserves and laying the groundwork for an insurance scheme that could ruin the whole community. Pat slid me a manila folder thick enough to choke a defense lawyer. Sterling Premium Builders had filed bankruptcy last month. Colorado had suspended their license for tax fraud. The HOA presidency wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics, it was a pipeline to community coffers. My harassment wasn't random. It was professional diversion, designed to keep a federal judge entangled in petty skirmishes while she carried out a much larger fraud. Systematically looted our neighborhood dry. But Pat's last reveal made my blood run cold. She'd already filed preliminary insurance claims alleging developing structural problems and heightened safety risks. Your house isn't merely a target, Judge, it's slated to be evidence in her next insurance heist. That night I sat amid a pile of proof that had escalated my private nightmare into a full-fledged federal RICO case. Bank records showing $340,000 missing from HOA emergency reserves. Insurance filings stuffed with lies that could trigger perjury counts. And a chilling pattern of singling out minorities and elderly residents that screamed civil rights violations. Bryn hadn't chosen me because I'd ruled against her husband. She'd picked me because terrorizing a federal judge provided the perfect cover for systematic theft and premeditated insurance fraud. In her arrogance, though, she'd made one catastrophic misstep. She'd decided to run interstate crimes against someone who knew precisely how to dismantle criminal enterprises with the full force of federal law. The soft glow of my laptop lit Harold's office as I began drafting letters to prosecutors who handled interstate fraud and civil rights abuses. Harold always said patience was more than a virtue, it was a weapon when used with perfect timing. Bryn Ashworth Sterling was about to learn that staging insurance scams while tormenting a federal judge wasn't merely foolish, it was ruinously, life-sentence foolish. The manila folder Pat Smith
across the table felt heavier than a verdict. Inside were photographs that made my hands tremble and my prosecutor's instincts flare. "Judge," Pat said, voice steady with the authority of 25 years hunting federal criminals, "what I'm about to show you changes everything. Bryn Ashworth Sterling doesn't exist." The first photo was a 2018 California driver's license, Rebecca Ashworth, Bryn's face smiling back at me. The next showed Beth Sterling from Phoenix, the same woman, a different name. The third made my coffee cup slip from numb fingers. Sandra McKenzie from Detroit, dated 2010, a federal prisoner ID stamped across the bottom. "She's a professional community destroyer," Pat said, arranging the evidence with surgical calm. 4 states, 6 aliases, a pattern of infiltrating HOAs, skimming association funds, and staging insurance fraud. Over $4 million stolen in the last decade. My judicial instincts kicked in, but the personal horror cracked my voice. How many families had she ruined? 15 confirmed victims. The pattern never varied. Pick established neighborhoods, launch harassment campaigns against minorities and the elderly, siphon emergency reserves, then torch valuable properties for insurance collects. Pat's FBI instincts remained razor-sharp even in retirement. In Sacramento, 3 Hispanic families were driven out before the community center later burned under suspicious circumstances. Phoenix saw 5 elderly residents suffer fatal stress-related health declines during her tenure. Then Pat slid the next sheet across the table, and my blood turned to ice. Architectural drawings from my home, pulled from the Sterling Premium Builders Contractor database, annotated with notes on electrical weaknesses, foundation access points, and suggested accelerants and airflow to speed fires. "She's been planning to burn your house down from the start," Pat said softly. The harassment was the diversion, while she prepared the perfect arson. My property's actual worth might be $180,000, but Harold's life insurance upgrades pushed the rebuild estimate to $320,000. She intended to claim fire spread to her own lot and trigger both policies for maximum payout. My hands trembled as I traced Harold's penciled notes about electrical upgrades we'd planned together in his last months, work meant to protect our sanctuary. Bryn had turned our love into her criminal opportunity. Pat's final reveal broke every assumption I'd clung to. This wasn't just a con artist. She was a federal fugitive using stolen identities and, astonishingly, had once been in witness protection. Sandra Mackenzie had testified against a Detroit fraud ring in 2012, served 18 months, then vanished from the program. And now she'd re-emerged as Bryn Ashworth Sterling, operating with impunity. 2015, the implication struck like a judicial gavel to the skull. This woman was running organized crime under the protection of federal witness programs, hijacking taxpayer-funded identities to commit the very offenses she had supposedly reformed from. The witness protection violation alone carries a minimum 10-year federal sentence, Pat said. Layer on multi-state fraud, identity theft, and attempted arson against a sitting federal judge. She was staring down life without parole. I stared at the photographs of families ruined, neighborhoods decimated, and elderly residents who had died from stress-induced heart attacks during her harassment campaigns. My personal nightmare was merely the latest entry in a decade-long federal crime spree. The musty scent of old case files mingled with the bitter taste of betrayal as I grasped the scale of Bryn's operations. She hadn't targeted me because of grudges. She'd researched Harold's death, my finances, my judicial calendar, and even my emotional attachments to craft the perfect victim profile. But in her arrogance, she had made one fatal mistake. She chose to commit federal crimes against someone who knew exactly how to coordinate multi-jurisdictional prosecutions across every federal agency, from the FBI to Treasury. Time to show this predator what federal justice looked like when it was personal, permanent, and merciless. By Thursday evening, my kitchen had become a war room. Pat, Walt, and attorney Rebecca Morgan sat around Harold's table like avenging angels, surrounded by boxes of evidence capable of burying Bryn's criminal empire 6 feet underground. Rebecca Morgan, a legal predator in designer suits, former federal prosecutor turned white-collar defense attorney, had never lost a RICO case and had apparently spent her career waiting for a villain exactly like this. She had driven down from Denver with 3 paralegals and enough legal firepower to dismantle a small dictatorship. "Judge, we're not just prosecuting neighborhood harassment," Rebecca announced, spreading color-coded flowcharts across the table like operational maps for a global campaign. "We're dismantling a decade-long federal crime spree that's destroyed 15 communities and stolen over $4 million. The scent of fresh legal documents mingled with Walt's pipe tobacco as we outlined our 3-pronged strategy: federal prosecution, state-level charges, and civil rights enforcement. Rebecca's plan was surgical in precision and biblical in scale. Federal charges came first. Mail fraud spanning multiple states carries a 20-year minimum. Wire fraud for electronic HOA theft tacked on another 20. Identity theft under witness protection programs added 10 mandatory. RICO for systematic community destruction, life without parole. She smiled like a shark. We're talking federal sentences that will keep her behind bars until the oceans rise. Pat coordinated federal agencies with retired FBI efficiency, making active agents look like mall security. Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Treasury Financial Crimes, FBI Interstate Fraud Task Force, all salivating over this case. By morning, Bryn would be under more federal surveillance than a terrorist cell. My role was evidence preservation and victim coordination, honed over 20 years of complex criminal trials. Back in law school, I'd memorized every clause of Colorado's Open Records Act after a slumlord tried hiding financial statements. HOA finances are transparent to anyone who knows how to ask, and we were about to demand 5 years' worth of records and watch Bryn's embezzlement empire collapse under scrutiny. Walt's Neighborhood Intelligence Network was our secret weapon. 60 years of community ties had created an information web that could make the CIA jealous. Every family Bryn terrorized was documenting everything, he reported, organizing statements with military precision. Mrs. Rodriguez was driving back from Phoenix with 17 witnesses. The Johnsons were compiling disability discrimination records that would make federal prosecutors salivate. Our most satisfying upgrade, though, was technical. Pat had converted my modest security system into full-scale federal evidence collection, capable of recording crimes in courtroom quality detail. Every camera angle calibrated to maximize prosecutorial impact. Here's the beautiful part, Pat said, testing audio equipment capable of picking up conversations 3 houses away. Bryn's committing new crimes in real time while we build the case. Every fraudulent fine, every harassment letter, every misappropriated HOA transfer generated instant evidence for federal prosecutors. Rebecca handled immediate legal protection with the ruthless precision of someone who had spent decades dismantling white-collar criminals. Emergency injunctions would freeze HOA accounts tomorrow morning. Criminal complaints would hit 3 jurisdictions simultaneously. Civil rights violations would be filed with the Colorado Attorney General, documenting systematic targeting based on ethnicity and age. The financial fallout for Bryn's operation would be catastrophic. From my years on the bench, I knew the Homeowners Protection Act required insurers to notify mortgage holders of fraud investigations. Bryn's scams would trigger audits on every Pinewood policy, saving neighbors hundreds of thousands in premiums while utterly destroying her credibility with insurers nationwide. Our protocols recognized that cornered criminals could become dangerous. Rebecca had arranged protective surveillance for vulnerable residents, including the elderly and families with small children. Federal precedent shows that organized fraudsters often escalate to violence when facing life sentences. By midnight, we had constructed a legal machine designed for total annihilation of Bryn's criminal enterprise, with maximum protection for every victim she had terrorized. The precision was exquisite, the scale overwhelming, and the outcome inevitable. When we're finished, Rebecca said, satisfaction in her voice, Ben Mackenzie will spend her remaining years in federal maximum security. Sterling Premium Builders will be liquidated for victim restitution. Every harassed resident would receive compensation plus punitive damages. And we would establish legal precedents to protect communities nationwide from similar predators. The quiet hum of my upgraded security system blended with the soft clicks of my keyboard as I drafted victim impact statements designed to compel federal judges to impose maximum sentences. Harold always said patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon, especially when paired with overwhelming legal force applied at precisely the right psychological moment. Tomorrow morning, Bryn Ashworth Sterling, professional criminal, would discover that terrorizing a federal judge's community wasn't merely foolish. It was life sentence guaranteeing, legacy destroying, federal prison ensuring stupid. Time to deliver justice with extreme legal prejudice. Bryn's reaction to our legal offensive proved she had graduated from
petty harassment to full-blown domestic terrorism.
Her desperation threatened to turn my neighborhood into a crime scene that would make federal prosecutors drool. The attack came Tuesday afternoon while I was downtown sentencing a wife-beater. Perfect alibi timing, clearly coordinated using my public court schedule. My military-grade security system captured every felonious second in high definition, evidentiary quality. At 2:47 p.m., unmarked trucks rolled up, deploying a crew that moved with unnerving efficiency. These weren't landscapers, they were arson specialists, clad in coveralls and armed with equipment intended for a single goal: turn my house into an insurance fire engineered to spread to Bryn's property for maximum payout. The cameras recorded them laying accelerant pathways around the foundation, rigging unmarked propane lines near electrical panels, and arranging dead vegetation in patterns designed to enhance combustion. That would guarantee fire spread toward Bryn's million-dollar target. The precision was terrifying, the criminal intent unmistakable, and the federal evidence quality irrefutably damning. Bryn's nuclear-level stupidity, however, reached its apex when she arrived with Channel 7's news crew, claiming she'd received anonymous tips about fire hazards at the judge's residence. "Community safety is my only concern," she told Sarah Morgan, standing directly atop planted evidence of her own arson plot. "When public officials ignore fire prevention, innocent neighbors could die." The audacity was staggering. The federal charges alone would be biblical. My phone immediately flooded with calls from Pat's surveillance network. Walt had photographed the entire crew from multiple angles. Mrs. Rodriguez had recorded license plates that would make police lineups unnecessary. Even our postal worker had documented suspicious activity while delivering what would have been the last mail my house might ever receive. Then Fire Marshal Jake Morrison arrived for Bryn's requested inspection. Morrison, a 30-year veteran of arson investigations, immediately recognized the setup. "Judge," he said quietly, kneeling beside the obviously artificial accelerant patterns, "someone's planning to burn your house. This isn't a code violation, this is premeditated murder." Soil analysis would later confirm professionally applied fire accelerants. Gas connections violated 16 safety codes and bore fingerprints that matched the Sterling Premium Contractor database. The placement patterns indicated expert knowledge of fire behavior, insurance investigations, and how to stage accidental blazes to maximize payouts. Whoever planned this, fraud escalated toward homicide. But Bryn's desperation reached its peak when Morrison refused to condemn my property based on staged evidence. His body-worn camera captured her response, a cash bribe attempt that turned petty harassment into federal corruption charges carrying decades-long prison terms. "Inspector, surely we can resolve this matter efficiently," Bryn said, sliding a thick envelope across his clipboard with well-practiced deceit. "Community safety requires proper documentation, and I trust you understand the value of cooperation." Morrison's body camera recorded every incriminating word, every unlawful gesture, and Bryn's stunned reaction when he explained that bribing a public official is a federal felony, punishable by a minimum of 10 years. The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Pat's intelligence network exposed similar arson plots at 3 other targeted homes, each owned by elderly residents or minority families. Federal agents descended on Pinewood like antibodies swarming an infection, documenting an organized terror campaign that mirrored organized crime. Rebecca Morgan's legal team acted swiftly and without mercy. Within hours, federal warrants were issued for Bryn, her husband, and their entire network. Bank accounts were frozen pending a RICO investigation, and Sterling Premium was placed under asset forfeiture that threatened to erase everything they had stolen. The cruel irony was that Bryn's planted evidence became undeniable forensic proof of premeditated arson. Her attempted bribe produced corruption charges that stacked neatly with the rest, like dominoes falling toward life sentences.
That evening, I sat surrounded by evidence that would ensure federal prison for every member of Bryn's enterprise. The acrid scent of accelerant still lingered in the air, but it no longer smelled of destruction. It carried the scent of justice, prepared with federal precision. My hands trembled as I realized just how close I had come to dying inside Harold's house. Entering this understands how to kill and make it look like an electrical malfunction, Morrison continued, his disgust palpable. These were not random safety violations. This was systematic preparation for insurance fraud and homicide. Surrounded by memories of our life together,
I imagined Bryn collecting insurance on my corpse. She hadn't simply planned theft, she'd plotted murder disguised as an accident. Yet her criminal arrogance unraveled the scheme. Every patch of planted accelerant became federal evidence. Every attempted bribe generated new felony counts. Every witness she tried to silence was now cooperating with federal prosecutors intent on the maximum penalty. The low hum of federal surveillance blended with the distant chatter of law enforcement units coordinating dawn raids that would end Bryn's reign of terror for good. Harold used to say that justice delayed wasn't justice denied. Sometimes it's justice being honed to lethal precision. Tomorrow morning, domestic terrorist Bryn Ashworth Sterling would learn that attempting to kill a federal judge carried consequences she'd never imagined. The explosion at 3:17 a.m. ripped me from dreams of Harold into a nightmare that would shadow Bryn through the rest of her federal sentence. I'd been sleeping in Walt's guest room, my own house unsafe after the previous day's arson preparations, when the blast rattled windows 3 blocks away. From Walt's window, I watched 28 years of memories erupt into flames. The night turned into a hellish orange day. Harold's house, our sanctuary, the kitchen where we'd planned retirement, the bedroom where I'd held him in his last nights, the memorial garden where his ashes rested among roses he tended for 15 years, all vanishing into smoke and federal proof. The fire was so fierce, Denver Fire had to set up a 3-block perimeter. Professional arsonists had transformed my home into a controlled demolition dressed up as an electrical failure, using methods designed for maximum destruction and precisely timed insurance claims. But Bryn's hubris had just produced the most elegant trap in federal prosecution history. I stood on Walt's porch in Harold's old bathrobe, watching our life burn as federal arson investigator Marcus Webb coordinated a crime scene that resembled domestic terrorism. "Judge, this wasn't random," he said, his voice flat. "Thermal imaging showed accelerant channels, perfectly engineered fire highways. Someone wanted you dead, and they wanted it to look accidental. The evidence was overwhelming and impeccably preserved," he continued. "My security system, sealed in a fireproof box, had survived and recorded every criminal moment. Sterling Premium's crew entering at 2:45 a.m., followed by Bryn's husband carrying professional fire acceleration gear at 3:10 a.m. The most damning evidence emerged from an unlikely source. Insurance investigator Jennifer Park uncovered that Bryn had filed early claims for fire damage spreading from a neighboring property at 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes before my home was even set ablaze. She had submitted paperwork insisting her house would suffer fire loss before the flames had ever started. "That's not foresight," Park declared with prosecutorial precision. "That's written proof of premeditated murder." The neighborhood's reaction was swift and powerful. Residents arrived with blankets, coffee, and a wave of righteous anger so fierce that federal agents took careful notes. Mrs. Rodriguez clutched my hands, tears streaming down her face. "Mija, she tried to kill you," she whispered. "We all saw her plotting this." Then came the scene destined for federal prosecution history. Bryn arrived at the blaze, dressed in designer athleisure, fully made up, at 4:30 a.m., feigning concern for the community while standing just 50 feet from the house she herself had destroyed. Her act was chilling in its theatrical detachment. "This terrible accident shows why our HOA must enforce strict safety standards," she told Channel 7 with a tone of staged grief.
Judge Blackwood's resistance to proper inspections may have contributed to this tragic loss. What she failed to realize was that FBI agents were documenting every statement for her eventual murder trial, while federal marshals were already drafting Dawn arrest warrants built on evidence so overwhelming that plea bargains were out of the question. Financial records revealed a toxic mix of cunning and carelessness. Bryn had siphoned $340,000 from HOA funds to bankroll the arson, and she had insured her house for $2.8 million despite purchasing it for only $800,000. The fraudulent fire claims she pre-filed could have triggered payouts larger than the budgets of small nations. But prosecutors had been monitoring her finances ever since Pat's alert put them on her trail. The investigation unfolded with ruthless precision. Bank records revealed direct payments to known arsonists. Cell phone data placed both perpetrators at the ignition site. Insurance applications contained lies so blatant they guaranteed perjury convictions in every jurisdiction. Rebecca Morgan's response was swift and biblical. Federal marshals arrested both Ashworth Sterlings in coordinated dawn raids broadcast live on
conventional television. Assets seized under RICO forfeiture were earmarked to compensate victims in 4 states. Sterling Premium was dismantled faster than paper through a shredder. The charges read like a catalog of ruin: attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, multi-state insurance fraud, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, and RICO violations that promised life sentences stretching into eternity. That evening, I sat in Walt's kitchen, surrounded by federal agents who had converged from across the country to coordinate the largest HOA fraud prosecution in American history. The smell of smoke still clung to my clothes, but now it carried the aroma of justice burning at maximum heat. My home was gone, yet Harold's memory endured through the community that had shielded me when his sanctuary could not. Bryn had tried to murder me in my sleep and instead generated evidence that would confine her until the stars burned out. The metallic snap of handcuffs echoing on the news felt like Harold's whisper of approval from whatever afterlife awaits judges. Some battles are worth losing everything to win forever. 7 days after my home became a crime scene, Bryn Ashworth Sterling entered my courtroom in federal custody. Her designer athleisure traded for an orange jumpsuit, her face shadowed by charges that would imprison her until archaeologists unearthed her remains. The irony was exquisite, as if Harold himself had orchestrated it from beyond. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity, with standing room crowds spilling outside to watch live streams. Federal marshals, FBI agents, insurance investigators, and prosecutors from 4 states filled the gallery like an army of justice marching into battle. Channel 7's cameras captured every moment with dramatic clarity. The Colorado Attorney General sat in the front row, taking notes for new civil rights legislation. Most poignantly, 17 families Bryn had defrauded were present, living proof that her empire of deceit had collapsed into federal justice. Those she had terrorized filled the courtroom as witnesses: Mrs. Rodriguez, the Johnson family with their disabled son, and elderly residents driven from their homes by her relentless harassment campaigns. Judge Patricia Morrison, my colleague who had agreed to preside after my recusal, called the court to order with the solemnity demanded by a domestic terrorism case. The people of Colorado versus Bryn McKenzie, also known as Bethany Sterling, also known as Rebecca Ashworth, also known as Sandra Mitchell. The litany of false identities took 30 seconds to read. The charges took nearly 4 minutes: attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, multi-state insurance fraud, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, RICO violations, identity theft, witness protection fraud, and systematic civil rights abuses. Bryn's attorney, a weary public defender who had clearly drawn the shortest straw in legal history, requested reasonable bond, citing her supposed community ties and lack of flight risk. Federal prosecutor Amanda Stevens rose with the calm satisfaction of someone holding a royal flush. "Your Honor," she began, "the defendant has operated under 6 false identities across 4 states, stolen more than $4 million, and destroyed 15 communities."
She attempted to murder a sitting federal judge by burning down her home, then appeared on television blaming the victim for her own near death. Bond is unthinkable. The gallery erupted in murmurs of righteous anger, so sharp that federal marshals shifted uneasily. But the moment destined for legal documentaries came when Bryn chose to speak for herself. "Your Honor," she said, turning toward me with the brazen arrogance of a sociopath blind to the devastation she had wrought, "Judge Blackwood has abused her position to orchestrate a vendetta against law-abiding homeowners. She has weaponized the federal government against citizens exercising legitimate HOA authority. This entire prosecution is nothing more than judicial abuse dressed up as justice." The silence that followed was deafening. Federal agents traded glances that hinted at new charges. Prosecutors scribbled notes furiously. The gallery froze, waiting for the court's reply. Judge Morrison's voice rang with 20 years of federal authority. "Miss Mackenzie," she said evenly, "you stand accused of attempting to murder a federal judge by burning down her home as she slept. You embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from community emergency funds. You operated under false identities while terrorizing elderly and minority residents. You filed fraudulent insurance claims totaling millions of dollars across multiple states." Judge Morrison paused, letting the weight of her words drop over the courtroom like a burial shroud. "The evidence against you includes security footage of the arson, recorded bribery attempts, documented harassment campaigns,
Financial records of systematic theft, and insurance applications so false they constitute federal perjury. You are not the victim of judicial abuse. You are a domestic terrorist who targeted a federal judge's community for destruction." Then came the blow that crushed whatever illusions Bryn still clung to. This court has also reviewed evidence that you destroyed 15 communities and displaced over 200 families through identical fraud schemes. Your pattern of targeting elderly and minority residents constitutes systematic civil rights violations that will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. Bryn's face collapsed as the certainty of stacked life sentences broke through her delusions. Her attorney leaned in, whispering about plea deals no one believed possible with evidence this overwhelming. "Bond is denied," Judge Morrison declared, her voice carrying finality across the packed chamber. "The defendant poses an extreme flight risk and a direct danger to public safety. She is remanded to federal custody pending trial." The gallery erupted in applause. Federal marshals didn't even try to stop it. Mrs. Rodriguez sobbed openly. Walt pumped his fist like his team had just clinched the championship. 17 families who had been terrorized by Bryn's criminal enterprise finally witnessed justice delivered at full force. As marshals dragged her away in chains, Bryn turned to me one last time, her glare sharp enough to cut steel. "This isn't over, Judge. You'll never prove I specifically targeted you." The room fell silent as I rose, my black robes parrying 2 decades of federal authority. "Mrs. Mackenzie," I said evenly, "your admission that this was targeted harassment is now part of the record for sentencing. Federal prosecutors now have your own words as documented evidence, premeditated intent. Thank you for eliminating any remaining reasonable doubt." The sound of justice echoed through my courtroom like Harold's final approval. 2 years later, I stood in my rebuilt kitchen, watching cardinals feed at Harold's Memorial Station, while federal maximum security served Bryn Mackenzie her daily portion of justice, life without parole in a concrete cage where domestic terrorists rot in their own choices. Morning coffee carried the added taste of satisfaction. Evil had finally been forced to choke on consequences. The criminal trials were prosecutors' dreams and defense attorneys' nightmares. Federal juries deliberated just 3 hours and 47 minutes before convicting both Ashworth Sterlings on every charge. Apparently, they took longer only because lunch was included.
Bryn received life without parole for attempted murder of a federal judge, plus stacked sentences for arson, fraud, and civil rights violations, enough time to keep her locked up until California turned into beachfront property. Her husband drew 25 years for conspiracy, enough to bury Sterling Premium's empire for good. The $3.2 million seized in assets was distributed across 4 states, creating the largest HOA fraud restitution in U.S. legal history. Every targeted family received compensation plus punitive damages, setting legal precedent to shield communities nationwide from predators disguised as HOA boards. But Pinewood's transformation became the real victory. Once a kingdom ruled by terror, now a model studied in law schools. Walt Henderson rose as unanimously elected HOA president, instituting transparency measures that made embezzlement impossible and protections guaranteeing due process in all disputes. Our bylaws were rewritten, community approval required for fines above $50, monthly financials published online, and mandatory mediation before lawsuits. Most important, systematic targeting based on age, race, or economic status was explicitly outlawed, with automatic removal for violators. The ripple spread like wildfire through American suburbs. Colorado's Pinewood Protection Act mandated HOA transparency statewide, reshaping how power was wielded in neighborhoods everywhere. The reforms spread quickly. Limited fine authority and mandatory state oversight were established for communities with patterns of systemic abuse. 15 other states adopted parallel legislation, protecting millions from future Bryn Mackenzies, while the original sat rotting in federal prison. The Judge Harold Blackwood Memorial Scholarship exceeded every expectation. Documentary rights, book sales, and donations from grateful neighborhoods raised $750,000 to support first-generation college students pursuing community law and civil rights. This year's standout recipient was Maria Rodriguez, daughter of the very family Bryn once terrorized, now bound for Harvard Law with plans to defend vulnerable communities nationwide. Our annual Pinewood Justice Festival drew thousands to celebrate a community's triumph over calculated evil. Local vendors donated proceeds to legal defense funds supporting neighborhoods fighting corruption. Walt's Bluegrass Band headlined, while Pat Donnelly led packed workshops on financial crime detection that had already equipped residents in 47 states to expose and prosecute HOA fraud. The festival blended celebration with education, anchored by our Community Resource Center, which trained neighborhoods to spot harassment tactics, track financial irregularities, and coordinate federal enforcement. 41 copycat criminals have been arrested using our model, sparing thousands of families from Bryn's blueprint of destruction. My judicial career earned national recognition for sustaining ethics under extreme fire, leading to invitations at law schools to speak on safeguarding community rights while preserving judicial integrity. The American Bar Association even established the Blackwood Award, honoring judges who demonstrated courage in defending civil rights against systemic abuse. But personal victory mattered more than professional accolades. Gavel had recovered fully, reclaiming his role as ruler of our rebuilt sanctuary with feline authority strong enough to unnerve federal marshals. The memorial garden bloomed more brilliantly than ever, Harold's roses thriving in soil enriched by the love of our community and shielded by security that ensured no act of terror would ever again take root. That evening, golden light poured through the new windows as I reviewed scholarship applications with Gavel presiding from his throne. Outside, Pat tended her flourishing garden of victory. Walt taught neighborhood kids how to play harmonica, while families gathered in conversations once silenced by Bryn's tyranny. The sound of children's laughter replaced sirens and shouting, proof that real justice isn't only punishment, it's protection, restoration, and the promise of futures free from suburban predators. Here's my message to anyone still locked in battle with HOA nightmares or petty rulers armed with tape measures. Document everything. Unite your neighbors. And never forget, bullies only win when good people stay quiet. Your nightmare might one day become the blueprint for someone else's deliverance. Drop a comment below with your own HOA horror story. You're not fighting alone. And hit that subscribe button for more HOA sagas, because next week we're dismantling the tax assessor who tried to steal an entire neighborhood for personal profit. That takedown was biblical, and the federal indictments were glorious. Together, we're building communities where justice triumphs and predators lose. Permanently. That's the close of today's HOA story. If you enjoyed watching Karma land with precision, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us about your own HOA battles. Subscribe so you don't miss the next meltdown. We've got plenty more stories where justice burns brighter than fear.